On the morning of November 18th, 2025, something happened in West Africa that no one had predicted. No expert, no health minister, and no international organization expected that within 30 minutes, a small and quiet nation often forgotten by the world would suddenly become the center of attention across the entire continent. And it all began with one signature, a document submitted in the capital, simple on the surface, but shocking in consequence, revealed that the government had officially requested authorization for pembrolizumab, one of the most advanced and expensive cancer treatments produced in the United States. This decision was so unexpected, so far beyond what a limited healthcare system would normally consider, that it immediately triggered heated debate across the continent. Why choose this moment? Why choose one of the most expensive treatments in the world? And why take a step that no other West African nation has ever dared to take? Some see this as a sign that the country wants to enter a new era of modern medicine, but others believe there is a deeper political message, or even that this is only one part of a much larger plan. Stay with this story until the end, and if you believe that truth matters more than headlines, consider subscribing to follow along with us. The announcement that emerged from Ouagadougou was not a rumor, nor a misinterpreted headline. It was an official submission to authorize one of the most advanced immunotherapy drugs in the world. Pembrolizumab, known globally under the name Keytruda, is a medication typically reserved for world-class hospitals in nations with deep financial resources, long-established oncology programs, and the infrastructure to support highly specialized treatment. Burkina Faso has never been considered one of those nations. For years, cancer has been an unspoken crisis across the country. Regional health records show more than 15,000 new cases every year, with over 70% detected only after the disease has already reached its final stages. Most patients never receive proper imaging, proper staging, or any form of early intervention. The country has only one radiotherapy center overwhelmed every single day, and basic machines such as CT scanners remain scarce, often outdated, or simply non-functional. Families who confront a cancer diagnosis often face another devastating reality. They must travel to Ghana, to Côte d'Ivoire, to Morocco, and only if they can afford it. Many sell their livestock, their land, or everything they have just for a chance at survival. Against this bleak landscape, the authorization request for Keytruda struck the region like lightning. This was not a minor administrative gesture. It was a declaration loud, bold, and unprecedented. Bringing such a drug into a system that still struggles with electricity shortages, limited laboratory capabilities, and a shortage of trained oncologists defies every conventional expectation. Yet the government moved forward anyway, submitting a dossier that committed the country to a path no other West African nation has taken. The implications were immediate. Health ministries across the continent demanded clarity. International observers questioned whether the country had the financial or technical capacity to sustain such a demanding therapy. Diplomats quietly asked whether this signaled a shift in geopolitical alignment. And ordinary citizens, many of whom have lived through the pain of losing loved ones to cancer, felt something they had not felt in many years' hope. But the filing itself was only the beginning. Behind that single document lay motivations deeper, more complex, and far more consequential than anyone first realized. And that realization leads us to a far larger question: why Keytruda, and why now? The moment the authorization request became public, the conversation inside the country shifted instantly. What had started as a quiet administrative update turned into a national reckoning, and the first wave of reaction came from the very people who had suffered the most. Across towns and villages, families who had buried mothers, brothers, children, and friends because they could not afford care finally allowed themselves to imagine something different. For the first time, they saw a possibility, a treatment that offered more than palliative care or prayer. In radio call-ins, community forums, and evening gatherings, ordinary citizens described the announcement as a light breaking through decades of darkness. Some said it felt like the country was finally refusing to accept death as destiny. But hope was only one side of the emotional storm. Doctors, nurses, and oncology workers across the health sector reacted with a mixture of admiration and deep anxiety. Many asked the questions no one in government had answered yet. Does the country have enough PD-L1 testing capability to determine who can even receive this therapy? Do hospitals have trained specialists who understand immune-related toxicities, conditions that can spiral out of control if mismanaged? And most pressing of all, How will treatment be funded when even basic chemotherapy often exceeds the budget of a typical household? These were not the doubts of skeptics, they were the concerns of professionals who knew the stakes better than anyone. They understood that a drug like Keytruda is not just a vial of medicine. It requires an entire ecosystem of diagnostics, follow-up care, emergency response, and long-term monitoring. Meanwhile, political analysts inside the country raised a different alarm. They noted that adopting a high-profile American therapy could trigger geopolitical reactions far beyond the medical sphere. Some warned that taking such a bold step would inevitably invite scrutiny from allies, rivals, and organizations with interests that extend far past healthcare. Inside the country, the mood became a blend of hope, fear, and historic anticipation. Everyone sensed that this decision was more than a medical policy. It was the beginning of a transformation whose end no one could yet see. And as the emotional tide built within the nation, the rest of the continent was already preparing its own response. While the nation was still absorbing the shock of the announcement, the reaction from the rest of the continent unfolded with remarkable speed. News networks across Africa broke into regular programming, treating the filing not as a local story but as a continental event. Analysts compared it to a political earthquake, one that had erupted not in a capital of wealth or power, but in a country long dismissed as too poor to attempt anything so ambitious. From West Africa to East Africa, governments called emergency meetings. Health ministers demanded briefings. In some nations, the tone was admiration. A belief that if one country dared to break the limitations imposed by poverty, others might follow. Editorials praised the courage to challenge a global system that often leaves the poorest behind in medical innovation. But in many boardrooms and policy circles, the reaction was starkly different. Concerns rose quickly about sustainability. Keytruda is not simply expensive. It is a long-term commitment, requiring laboratory precision, vast funding, and political stability. Officials questioned whether this bold step would create a financial precedent that neighboring countries would be pressured to match. Some argued quietly that the move could destabilize regional health budgets or force governments into public commitments they could not fulfill. At international organizations, the response was even sharper. Specialists at global health agencies noted the unusually rapid processing timeline. Regulatory experts questioned whether external influences had played a role, and the mention of a third-party financial partner triggered intense speculation, from philanthropic megafunds to private biotech investors, none of which eased the anxiety of policymakers who fear that hidden interests may reshape regional health priorities. Still, on social media across the continent, the tone was overwhelmingly emotional. Thousands of messages expressed disbelief that a country with such limited resources would be the one to defy expectations. Many ordinary Africans saw the move as an act of defiance, proof that the poorest are not condemned to accept the medical scraps of the world. By the end of the first week, the reaction had spread far beyond Africa. Foreign diplomats, global pharmaceutical analysts, and humanitarian organizations were all watching closely. And it was becoming clear that this story had moved past medicine. It had become a question of power: who holds it, who challenges it, and who dares to rewrite the rules. When the shock settled, and the headlines faded into daily discussion, the deeper implications of the decision began to surface not in government halls, but in homes, clinics, and crowded hospital corridors. This was where the true weight of the announcement was felt. For ordinary citizens, the possibility of accessing a drug like Keytruda represented more than scientific progress. It touched something profoundly human: the right to fight for life. In communities across the country, families who had long accepted cancer as a silent death sentence began to ask new questions. Parents wondered whether future diagnoses might come with real treatment options. Young adults hoped they would no longer have to watch their elders fade away without receiving even the most basic modern therapies. The shift in national psychology was unmistakable. People dared to imagine survival where they once expected loss. But hope collided quickly with harsh realities. Keytruda is not simply a medication, it is a commitment. A full year of treatment can exceed $40,000 per patient, an amount that dwarfs the average income of most households. Even if subsidies or international programs reduced the cost, the strain on the national health budget would be enormous. Schools, maternity wards, water projects, and basic infrastructure could all be squeezed under the weight of sustaining such a therapy. And then there was the medical infrastructure itself. To administer Keytruda safely, the country would need reliable diagnostic labs capable of testing biomarkers. It would need specialists trained in immunotherapy, It would need emergency response capabilities to manage rare but severe immune reactions. In many regions, clinics still struggle with electricity interruptions and limited cold chain storage conditions far from what this therapy requires. These structural challenges sparked a second wave of concern. Would the introduction of such an advanced medication inadvertently widen inequality? Would treatment be reserved only for the privileged few, those living near major hospitals or with connections in the health system? And would rural communities once again be left behind, forced to watch progress pass them by? The announcement had opened a door to possibility, yes, but it had also exposed the magnitude of the work ahead. And as the social implications unfolded, the political consequences were already rising in parallel. Because when medicine intersects with national strategy, the impact is never confined to hospitals alone. As the social consequences of the decision became clearer, a different kind of tension grew quietly but rapidly inside the political landscape. High-level advisors, diplomats, and security analysts began examining a truth that few citizens had considered. A move this bold would inevitably reshape the country's geopolitical position. First, the alignment issue. The country has spent recent years redefining its foreign partnerships, pulling away from certain traditional allies while strengthening ties with others. Introducing a flagship American cancer therapy into the national health system complicates this balancing act. Some foreign observers interpreted the filing as a subtle gesture toward Washington, a signal that the government was willing to diversify strategic relationships. Others saw it as a tactical message, an attempt to show that the country could engage globally on its own terms, without choosing sides. Inside the region, neighboring governments worried about precedent. If one country breaks through long-standing economic barriers to adopt cutting-edge medicine, political pressure may build for others to follow. Opposition parties across West Africa quickly framed the move as a symbol of ambition, a challenge to leaders who had accepted limited health progress as unchangeable. For regional blocs, it raised uncomfortable questions. Would they support such a disruptive transformation, or caution against the financial risks? Internationally, global health actors and diplomatic missions requested classified briefings. They wanted to know who financed the filing. They wanted to understand why the regulatory process moved so quickly. And most importantly, they wanted clarity on whether external powers were influencing health decisions that could shift political loyalties. The possibility of a biomedical alignment strategy sparked debate in global policy circles. Domestically, political factions reacted in predictable but intensifying ways. Supporters of the administration portrayed the move as historic, proof of a government willing to break old constraints. Critics argued it was reckless, accusing leadership of using medical reform to bolster political capital. Some feared that if the program failed, or if costs spiraled, the public backlash could destabilize the government itself. What became evident was simple. This was no longer a story about medicine. It was a test of political courage, state capacity, regional influence, and the country's ability to navigate global power structures without losing its sovereignty. And the world, especially the great powers, had already begun forming their own interpretations. In Washington, the filing did not go unnoticed. Pembrolizumab, or Keytruda, is not merely a medical product. It is one of the crown jewels of American biotechnology, a symbol of 2 decades of research, investment, and scientific leadership. When a low-income nation with limited healthcare capacity suddenly sought authorization for such a therapy, analysts inside the United States immediately began reading between the lines. For American health officials, the first question was technical. Does the country have the infrastructure to use this drug safely? Will the clinical environment protect patients from the complications that immunotherapy can trigger? These concerns were valid, but they were not the primary focus. The true discussions unfolded in strategic circles. To some policymakers, the filing signaled a potential opening, an invitation to build medical partnerships, expand American health diplomacy, and strengthen influence in a region where global powers have been fiercely competing. They saw opportunity, a chance to support training programs, expand pharmaceutical access, and provide technical assistance that could improve lives while building goodwill. But others viewed the situation far more cautiously. In recent years, foreign powers have intensified their presence in West Africa, attempting to reshape alliances, economies, and military cooperation. When a country already navigating these shifting partnerships suddenly requests a flagship American therapy, U.S. analysts wonder whether this is a pivot, a negotiation tactic, or a strategic hedge. Was the government signaling a desire to rebalance its external relationships? Was it seeking leverage by engaging multiple global actors at once? Or was the decision driven purely by domestic necessity, with no geopolitical intention at all? Within think tanks and congressional committees, the debate sharpened further. Some argued that supporting the request could strengthen regional stability through health diplomacy. Others warned that the United States should tread carefully, ensuring that assistance does not unintentionally entangle American institutions in a complex and rapidly shifting political landscape. One thing was certain: the filing forced Washington to reconsider its assumptions about what smaller nations are willing or determined to attempt. And as the United States debated its next steps, the broader international community was already responding in its own distinct ways. Across the Atlantic and throughout major world capitals, the filing sent ripples through institutions that rarely agree on anything. Global health organizations, development agencies, regulatory bodies, and multinational pharmaceutical groups all found themselves confronted with a surprising and unavoidable question. What does it mean when a country long considered resource-constrained attempts to leap directly into the era of advanced immunotherapy? At the World Health Organization, internal memos reflected a mixture of excitement and concern. On one hand, leaders welcomed the message that nations should not be excluded from cutting-edge medicine simply because they lack wealth. On the other hand, they understood the complex reality. The infrastructure demands of a therapy like Keytruda far exceed what most developing health systems can sustain. Officials warned that the move could inspire other nations to make similar requests, without the necessary preparation potentially straining global supply chains and regulatory systems. In Europe, policy specialists examined the political implications more than the medical ones. Some believe the decision signaled a shift in how developing nations view their place in global health hierarchies, no longer as passive recipients of aid, but as assertive actors demanding equal access to innovation. Others cautioned that introducing such therapies without long-term financing could create cycles of dependency, leaving local systems vulnerable if geopolitical tensions disrupt pharmaceutical supply. In Asia and Latin America, the reaction was similar, but layered with empathy. These regions know what it means to navigate medical inequality, to watch state-of-the-art treatments debut elsewhere before slowly trickling down years later. Analysts framed the filing as a symbol of defiance, proof that a country need not wait politely in line behind wealthier nations to claim its share of modern science. Meanwhile, within global philanthropic networks and private biotech investors, the mention of a mysterious, third-party financial partner ignited intense speculation. Was this a humanitarian organization preparing to fund a bold pilot program? A private foundation seeking to reshape global cancer treatment models? Or something far more strategic, an entity aiming to influence political alignments through health diplomacy? What became clear was that the decision had expanded far beyond national borders. It challenged assumptions, disrupted expectations, and forced global institutions to rethink the boundaries of what is possible for a nation determined to break through its limitations. And just as the world adjusted to this new reality, a far more surprising revelation was about to emerge. Just when the world believed it had finally understood the magnitude of the filing, a new set of documents surfaced quietly, anonymously, and at a moment when global attention was already at its peak. These documents, leaked through a network of regional journalists, described details that had never been intended for public eyes. And what they revealed shifted the entire narrative. The first revelation stunned observers. The mysterious third-party financial partner mentioned in the application was not a humanitarian organization, not a governmental agency, and not a global development fund. Instead, it was a private North American biotechnology consortium, one with no public presence, no history of charitable engagement, and no official mandate to operate in African public health systems. Even more striking was what the documents implied. This consortium had approached government officials months before the public filing, offering to underwrite part of the authorization process in exchange for early access to anonymized treatment data once the program began. The arrangement, while not illegal, sparked immediate concerns. Why would a private biotech group be interested in immune response data from a low-income nation? What were they hoping to observe, measure, or test? And why move in secrecy, avoiding the typical structures of international cooperation? The second revelation was just as unsettling. The processing timeline, unusually fast even by emergency standards, appeared to have been accelerated after direct lobbying by representatives linked to the consortium. This raised questions about influence, transparency, and the extent to which external actors had shaped the decision. The world had believed the story was about access to modern medicine, but now it seemed the filing was also the opening move in a larger strategic game, one that blended politics, science, and global power in ways few had anticipated. And the most unexpected twist was still to come. As analysts pored over the leaked documents and global commentators rushed to interpret the involvement of a North American biotech consortium, a quieter revelation emerged, one that reframed the entire story. It did not come from whistleblowers or investigative journalists. It came from a small group of senior officials who, under intense international pressure, finally clarified what had been unfolding behind closed doors for nearly a year. The real strategic ambition was not simply to bring Keytruda into the country. It was to position Burkina Faso as the first West African nation capable of building a sovereign immunotherapy program, one that would no longer depend entirely on foreign charity, outdated treatment models, or the slow trickle of global aid. This initiative, long discussed internally, had a projected timeline extending to the year 2030 and was designed to transform the country into a regional hub for advanced cancer care. For the first time, the world understood the broader intent. The leadership was not reacting impulsively. They were executing a long-term plan. And at the center of that plan was Ibrahim Traoré. While Africa News focused on the controversy surrounding the leaked documents, what many missed was the deeper significance. Traoré was attempting to redefine what national sovereignty means for a modern African state. Not just political sovereignty, not just military or economic sovereignty, but medical sovereignty, the power to determine who receives life-saving treatment, how research is conducted, and whether the continent must always wait for others to decide its medical future. This was the most unexpected twist of all. The filing was not the end of the story. It was the opening move of a leader who believed his country could stand at the forefront of a new era. And now, the world would have to decide how to respond to a Burkina Faso that refused to stay in the margins. In the days that followed the revelations, debates continued across the continent and around the world. Analysts argued, experts cautioned, headlines surged through Africa News. But in the quiet moments in homes, clinics, and community centers across Burkina Faso, something deeper was taking shape. A new understanding of what a nation could strive for, when it refused to accept the limits others had written for it. For years, people believed that advanced medicine belonged only to wealthy nations. That sovereignty was measured purely in borders and armies. But the bold vision of Ibrahim Traoré challenged all of that. He pushed his country to step into a future many thought unreachable, believing that dignity begins with the right to fight for life. Yes, questions remain. Yes, risks are real. But every movement that reshapes history begins with one leader willing to stand where no one else has stood, and one nation willing to believe in more than survival. And in that sense, Burkina Faso has already crossed a threshold. As Traoré himself has said, we do not ask permission to be free, we rise to claim it. If this story resonates with you, if you believe Africa deserves a future defined by courage rather than circumstance, please share this message. And subscribe if you believe that truth must always rise above the headlines.